The briefing room was packed. Jake sat at the front table with Colonel Martinez and the other senior staff. Behind them, squad leaders from all the different species filled the chairs. The morning tactical assessment meeting was about to begin. Jake had spent 3 days watching the base operations. He had seen Kane work with different units, always calm and professional, but he still had no answers about her missing service record. Today, he planned to get them. Colonel Martinez stood up. "Good morning, everyone. Sergeant Morrison has been observing our operations for 3 days. Today he will share his initial assessment and ask questions about our combat readiness." Jake stood and looked around the room. He saw humans, Vortac warriors with their gray skin and massive builds, small green Zilani with their large eyes, and a few other species he was still learning about. Kane sat in the third row, her expression neutral. "Thank you, Colonel," Jake began. "I have watched your training exercises and daily operations. Overall, your soldiers show good discipline and technical skills. However, I have concerns about the command structure in mixed species units." A few soldiers shifted in their seats. Jake continued. "Military effectiveness depends on clear chains of command and proven leadership. This requires complete service records and documented combat experience." Jake looked directly at Kane. "Some personnel files are incomplete, which makes it difficult to assess leadership qualifications." The room was quiet. Jake could feel tension building. "For example," Jake said, pulling out his data pad, "Corporal Kane has been mentioned in several reports as taking leadership roles in training exercises, yet her official service record shows no combat experience, no advanced training, and no qualifications for leading mixed species operations." Kane's expression did not change, but Jake noticed several alien soldiers looking uncomfortable. A large Vortac warrior named Kraltalk was frowning. 2 Zilani were exchanging quick glances. Jake kept going. "In the Marines, we promote based on merit and proven ability. We do not give leadership roles to soldiers who cannot document their qualifications." He looked at Kane again. "I would like to see Corporal Kane's complete combat record to understand why other soldiers defer to her authority." The silence in the room was thick. Jake could hear the quiet hum of the base's air systems. Then Kane stood up slowly. "Sergeant Morrison," she said in a calm voice. "You want to see my combat record?" "Yes, Corporal." "Complete documentation of your combat experience and qualifications." Kane walked to the front of the room. Every eye was on her. She stopped about 6 feet from Jake and looked at him directly. Then, without saying a word, she rolled up the sleeves of her uniform shirt. Jake's breath caught in his throat. Kane's arms were covered with scars, not small training scars or accident marks. These were serious combat wounds, long, straight, lines that looked like knife cuts, round marks that could only be bullet holes, burn marks from energy weapons. Some scars were old and white, others were newer and still slightly pink. "Some records are kept in files, Sergeant," Kane said quietly. "Others are written in flesh." The room was completely silent. Jake stared at Kane's arms, trying to count the scars. There were dozens of them. Each one told a story of violence and survival. Kane rolled her sleeves higher, showing more scars on her upper arms. "This one," she said, pointing to a long mark on her left forearm, "was from a Nexari blade during the defense of mining station Omega-3. This one," she touched a round scar on her right arm, "was from a projectile weapon during first contact with the Keth Empire." Jake felt his confidence cracking. He had never heard of mining station Omega-3 or first contact with the Keth Empire. These were not operations in any database he had access to. Kane continued in the same calm voice. This burn mark was from a plasma grenade during the evacuation of Research Base 7. This puncture wound was from a Torgan spine thrower during the rescue of the diplomatic team on Kepler 4. Each name she mentioned was unknown to Jake, but he could see recognition in the eyes of some of the alien soldiers. Kraltak was nodding slowly. The Zilani were watching with what looked like respect. "You want documentation, Sergeant?" Kane asked. She rolled up her sleeve even higher, showing a particularly nasty scar that wrapped around her entire upper arm. "Here is my documentation. Every mark was earned protecting human and alien lives. Every scar represents a mission where soldiers went home to their families because someone was willing to bleed for them." Jake found his voice. "Those operations, they are not in any database I can access." "No," Kane said simply. "They are not." Colonel Martinez spoke for the first time since Jake began his presentation. "Sergeant Morrison, Corporal Kane's service record is classified well above your clearance level. Her assignments have included deep space reconnaissance, first, contact scenarios, and black operations that do not officially exist." Jake felt like the ground was shifting under his feet. "But her file shows no combat experience. Her official file shows exactly what it is supposed to show," the colonel said. "Nothing more, nothing less." Kane rolled her sleeves back down. "I understand your concern about leadership qualifications, Sergeant, but in combat, soldiers do not follow you because of what is written in your file. They follow you because they trust you to bring them home alive." She gestured to the alien soldiers in the room. "Kraltak follows my lead because he has seen me fight beside him against enemies that wanted to kill us both. Pip-9 trusts my tactical decisions because she has watched me adapt human strategies to work with Zilani technology under fire. These soldiers do not care about my paperwork. They care about my ability to keep them alive." Jake looked around the room. The alien soldiers were watching him now, not with hostility, but with something like pity. He was beginning to understand that he had made a serious mistake. Kane stepped closer to him. "You want to test my combat readiness, Sergeant? You want to see if I am qualified to lead mixed species operations?" She paused. "Then test me. Put together a combat scenario. Make it as difficult as you want. Let me show you what experience looks like when paperwork is not enough." The challenge hung in the air. Jake realized that everyone in the room was waiting for his response. He had come here to expose what he thought was an unqualified soldier getting respect she had not earned. Instead, he had found something completely different. "What kind of scenario?" he asked. Kane smiled for the first time since he had met her. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what they were capable of. "You choose, Sergeant. Pick the hardest combat simulation this base has. Use whatever enemy you think will challenge us most. I will put together a team and show you how soldiers with real experience handle impossible situations." Jake looked at Colonel Martinez, who nodded slightly. He looked back at Kane, who was waiting calmly for his answer. "All right, Corporal," Jake said. "I will design a combat exercise that will test every skill you claim to have. If you can prove your abilities, in action I will withdraw my concerns about your qualifications." "Fair enough," Kane said. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow morning," Jake replied. "I will have the scenario ready by then." Kane nodded and returned to her seat. The rest of the briefing continued, but Jake barely heard any of it. His mind was racing, trying to figure out what he had gotten himself into. He had wanted to expose a fraud. Instead, he had challenged someone whose arms were covered with proof of battles he could not even imagine. As the meeting ended and soldiers filed out, Jake noticed that several of the alien soldiers stopped to talk quietly with Kane. Whatever they were saying, it looked like they were offering support and encouragement. Jake was beginning to realize that he might have seriously underestimated exactly who he was dealing with. The transport ship shook as it came out of hyperspace. Jake Morrison gripped his seat and looked out the small window. Stars filled the black space around them, but one bright object caught his attention. It was Forward Operating Base Luna 7, hanging in space like a giant metal city. Jake had been a Marine staff sergeant for 8 years. He had seen many bases before, but never one like this. Luna 7 was huge, with different sections that looked like they were built by different species. Some parts had the clean lines of human engineering. Other sections looked organic and curved. Clearly built by aliens. Weapon platforms stuck out from the base like thorns on a giant flower. "First time seeing a joint base, Sergeant?" asked the pilot over the intercom. "Yes, sir," Jake replied. He had read about these places but had never been assigned to one. Joint bases were where humans worked alongside alien species. The idea still felt strange to him. The docking process took 20 minutes. Jake felt the ship lock onto the base with a metallic clang. He grabbed his gear bag and walked to the airlock. The door opened with a hiss, and he stepped into Luna 7. The first thing that hit him was the smell. It was not bad, just different. There was something metallic in the air, mixed with other scents he could not identify. The corridor was wide enough for 3 people to walk side by side. The walls were gray metal with blue lights running along the edges. Jake followed the signs to the command center. Along the way, he passed different aliens in the hallways. A tall, 4-armed creature with purple skin nodded at him. 2 smaller beings with large eyes and green skin were talking in high-pitched voices. Jake tried not to stare, but it was hard. He had only seen aliens in training videos before. At the command center, Jake reported to Colonel Martinez. The colonel was a thin man with gray hair and tired eyes. His office was small but clean, with a large screen showing the star system around them. "Welcome to Luna 7, Sergeant Morrison," the colonel said, shaking Jake's hand. "I hope you are ready for something different." "Yes, sir. What are my orders?" Colonel Martinez walked to his desk and picked up a data pad. "You are here to evaluate our combat units. We have humans, Vortak warriors, Zelani tech specialists, and a few other species. Your job is to figure out how well they work together, and if they are ready for real combat." Jake nodded. This was what he expected. "How many units am I looking at?" 12 mixed species squads, about 200 personnel total. The colonel handed him the data pad. "Here are their files. Some are more complete than others." Jake spent the next hour in his new quarters reading through the files. Most of them were standard: service records, training scores, previous assignments. But some files were much thinner than others. One file in particular caught his attention. Corporal Lisa Kane, human, age 26. The file said she had been in the Marines for 6 years, but her service record only showed basic training and her assignment to Luna 7. No combat experience listed, no special training, no medals or commendations. It was the thinnest file he had ever seen for someone with her rank. What made it stranger was that other files mentioned her. Several alien soldiers had notes in their records about training exercises with Kane. A Vortak warrior named Kral Talk had a note that said, "Learned much from human Kane about close combat tactics." A Zelani named Pip 9 mentioned Kane in 3 different training reports. Jake made a note to talk to Kane soon. Something was not right about her file. The next morning, Jake went to the training area. It was a large room with different sections for different types of practice. One area had shooting ranges. Another had obstacle courses. In the center was an open space where soldiers could practice hand-to-hand combat. Jake watched the morning training session. About 50 soldiers were working out, including humans and aliens. He spotted Kane easily. She was average height with brown hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She wore standard Marine workout clothes and looked like any other soldier. But as Jake watched, he noticed something odd. The alien soldiers seemed to watch Kane when she moved. When she showed a fighting technique to a young human soldier, a group of Vortak warriors stopped their own training to observe. When she called out corrections during a shooting exercise, even the experienced aliens listened. This was strange. Vortak warriors were proud fighters who rarely took advice from anyone. Zilani were known to be brilliant and usually ignored soldiers they considered less intelligent. But here they were, paying attention to a corporal whose file showed no special qualifications. Jake decided to watch Kane more closely. During a combat drill, she moved with a confidence that surprised him. She was not the biggest or strongest soldier in the room, but she seemed to know exactly what she was doing. When a Vortak warrior struggled with a human weapon, Kane showed him how to hold it properly. The warrior, who stood nearly 7 feet tall and had arms like tree trunks, thanked her politely. After the training session, Jake approached Kane. She was cleaning her rifle at a maintenance station. "Corporal Kane?" She looked up. Her eyes were green and alert. "Yes, Sergeant?" "I am Jake Morrison. I am here to evaluate the combat readiness of the units. I would like to talk to you about your experience here." Kane nodded. "Of course, Sergeant. What would you like to know?" Jake pulled out his data pad. "I have been reading through personnel files. Yours seems incomplete. It shows basic training, and your assignment here, but not much else. No combat experience, no special training. Yet I see other soldiers treating you like you have significant experience." Kane continued cleaning her rifle. Her hands moved steadily, showing the automatic movements of someone who had done this many times. "My file shows what it needs to show, Sergeant." "What does that mean?" "It means my service record is accurate for what you are cleared to see." Jake felt a flash of irritation. He did not like games or mysterious answers. "Corporal, I am trying to evaluate combat readiness. I need to understand the experience level of key personnel." Kane looked at him directly. "I understand, Sergeant, but some things are not in files." Before Jake could respond, Kane finished with her rifle and stood up. "If you want to evaluate my combat readiness, I suggest you watch me in action rather than reading paperwork." She walked away, leaving Jake standing at the maintenance station with more questions than answers. He made another note on his data pad. He needed to dig deeper into Kane's background. Something was definitely not right, and he intended to find out what it was. That evening, Jake requested additional information from Personnel Command. The response came back quickly. "Corporal Kane's full service record is classified above your clearance level." Jake stared at the message. In 8 years as a Marine, he had never seen a corporal's file that was classified beyond his access. He was more determined than ever to find out what Lisa Kane was hiding. Jake spent the entire night planning the combat exercise. He sat in his quarters with multiple data screens open, researching the most challenging scenarios the base's simulation system could create. He wanted something that would push Kane to her limits and expose any weaknesses in her supposed experience. After reviewing dozens of options, Jake chose the Nexari assault scenario. The Nexari were one of the most dangerous hostile species known to human space. They were fast, intelligent, and completely ruthless. Their technology was advanced, and they never took prisoners. The simulation was designed to be nearly impossible for a standard Marine unit. Jake programmed the scenario for maximum difficulty. The simulated Nexari force would outnumber Kane's team 3-1. They would have better weapons and defensive positions. The terrain would favor the enemy. If Kane was truly as experienced as her scars suggested, this would prove it. If she was not, the simulation would expose her quickly. The next morning, Jake arrived at the Combat Simulation Center early. The facility was impressive, with holographic projectors that could create completely realistic environments. The weapons fired training rounds that registered hits on the soldiers' armor sensors. Pain simulators made wounds feel real without causing actual injury. Kane arrived exactly on time with her chosen team. Jake was surprised by her selections. She had picked only 4 other soldiers for what was designed to be a squad-level exercise. Corporal Kane, Jake said, "This scenario is designed for a full squad of 8 to 10 soldiers. You only have 5 total." Kane shrugged. "Numbers do not always matter, Sergeant. Sometimes skill and coordination are more important than size." Jake looked at her team. There was Ben Hayes, a human demolitions expert who looked young but carried himself with confidence. Zara Ka was a Vortak warrior, nearly 7 feet tall, with arms like tree trunks and scars visible on her gray skin. Nick 7 was a Zalani tech specialist, small and green with the large eyes typical of his species. The final member was someone Jake had not seen before, a human woman named Amy Clark, who wore the insignia of a communications specialist. "These are your choices?" Jake asked. "These are my people," Kane replied. There was something in the way she said it that made Jake pause. She did not say, "my choices," or "my team." She said, "my people," like they were family. Jake noticed that each of Kane's team members had visible scars. Ben Hayes had a mark across his left cheek that looked like a burn. Zara Ka's arms showed multiple knife wounds. Nick 7 had what appeared to be blast-damage scars on the visible parts of his green skin. Amy Clark had a scar along her jawline that suggested she had taken a serious hit to the face. "Before we begin," Kane said, "what exactly are we facing in this simulation?" Jake pulled up the scenario details on his data pad. Nexari Assault Force, 48 enemy combatants with advanced weapons and armor. They have fortified positions in an urban environment with multiple levels and cover options. Your mission is to secure the Central Command building and eliminate all enemy forces. Kane nodded slowly. "Nexari. Interesting choice, Sergeant." There was something in her tone that Jake could not identify. It was not fear or concern. It was almost like recognition. "You are familiar with Nexari tactics?" Jake asked. "You could say that," Kane replied. She looked at her team. "Everyone clear on the mission?" Ben Hayes grinned. "Just like old times, Lisa." Zara Ka rumbled something in her own language that sounded like agreement. Nick 7's large eyes were bright with what looked like excitement. Amy Clark just nodded. Jake led them to the simulation chamber. It was a large room with gray walls and ceiling covered in holographic projectors. When activated, the projectors would create a completely realistic environment that would respond to the soldiers' actions. "The simulation will begin when you enter the chamber," Jake explained. "You will have standard Marine equipment plus whatever specialist gear your team members require. The exercise ends when you complete the mission or when your entire team is eliminated." Kane checked her rifle and looked at her team. "Ready?" They all nodded. Jake noticed they moved with the easy coordination of people who had worked together many times before. There was no discussion of tactics or roles. Everyone seemed to know exactly what they were supposed to do. "Begin simulation," Jake announced to the control room. The chamber walls disappeared, replaced by a realistic cityscape. Tall buildings surrounded a central plaza, with the target command building in the middle. Jake could see Nexari soldiers moving in the windows and on rooftops. The detail was incredible. Even the smell of smoke and concrete dust seemed real. Kane's team moved immediately. There was no hesitation or confusion. Kane took point with Ben Hayes covering her left flank. Zaraka moved to the right with her heavy plasma rifle ready. Nick 7 stayed in the center, his fingers dancing over a portable computer interface. Amy Clark brought up the rear, her communications equipment scanning for enemy signals. Jake watched from the observation booth as Kane led her team through the simulated city. What he saw amazed him. Kane moved like she knew exactly where every enemy soldier was positioned. She avoided patrol routes and ambush points with an accuracy that should have been impossible. When the team encountered their first group of Nexari soldiers, the engagement was over in seconds. Kane's tactics were brutal and efficient. She used Ben's explosives to flush enemies from cover, while Zaraka's heavy weapons suppressed their return fire. Nick 7 jammed their communications, and Amy coordinated the team's movements with precision timing. "How is she doing this?" Jake asked the simulation technician. "I do not know, Sergeant," the technician replied. "She is anticipating enemy movements before they happen. It is like she has fought Nexari before." Jake watched more closely. Kane was not just guessing where enemies would be. She was predicting their tactics with impossible accuracy. When a group of Nexari tried to flank her team, Kane was already moving to counter them. When they attempted to call for reinforcements, Nick's 7 was jamming their communications before they could complete the transmission. The team moved through the simulation like they were following a script. Every movement was coordinated. Every engagement was over quickly. Jake had designed this scenario to be nearly impossible, but Kane's team was making it look easy. Halfway through the mission, Jake realized something that made his blood run cold. Kane was not just fighting the Nexari effectively, she was fighting them like she knew exactly how they thought and moved. Every tactic she used was a perfect counter to standard Nexari strategies. The final assault on the command building was a masterpiece of coordination. Ben's explosives breached the main entrance while Zaraka provided covering fire from an elevated position. Kane and Amy entered the building using tactics that neutralized the Nexari's advantages in close-quarters combat. Nick 7 took control of the building's systems and turned the Nexari's own defenses against them. When the simulation ended, all 48 enemy soldiers were eliminated. Kane's team had suffered no casualties and only minor wounds. The mission that was supposed to be nearly impossible had been completed in 37 minutes. Jake stared at the results display in disbelief. He had never seen a simulation performance like this, not from Special Forces units or elite Marine squads. Kane's team emerged from the simulation chamber. They were sweating and breathing hard, but they looked satisfied rather than exhausted. Jake noticed they were talking quietly among themselves, discussing parts of the exercise like it was a routine training mission. Kane walked up to Jake. "Was that sufficient demonstration of combat readiness, Sergeant?" Jake found his voice. "How did you do that? The tactics you used. It was like you had fought Nexari before." Kane looked at him with those calm green eyes. "Maybe I have, Sergeant." Before Jake could ask what she meant, Kane gathered her team and left the simulation center. Jake stood alone in the observation booth, staring at the performance statistics on the screen. 37 minutes, 0 casualties, perfect tactical execution. He was beginning to understand that everything he thought he knew about Corporal Lisa Kane was wrong. Jake could not stop thinking about the simulation. He had watched Kane's team destroy an impossible scenario with tactics that seemed too perfect to be real. That evening, he decided to run the exercise again, but this time he would participate, directly instead of just observing. The next morning, Jake approached Kane in the mess hall. She was sitting with her team, eating breakfast and talking quietly. When Jake walked up, the conversation stopped. "Corporal Kane," Jake said, "I want to run yesterday's simulation again." Kane looked up from her food. "You were not satisfied with our performance, Sergeant? I want to understand it better," Jake replied. "This time, I would like to participate as part of your team." Kane's team exchanged glances. Ben Hayes grinned. "You sure about that, Sergeant? It gets pretty intense." Jake felt a flash of irritation. "I have been in combat before, Corporal." "Have you fought Nexari before?" Amy Clark asked quietly. The question caught Jake off guard. "It was a simulation." Zara Ka rumbled something in her own language. Nick 7 translated. "She says that for some of us the simulation brings back memories." Kane studied Jake's face. "All right, Sergeant, you can join us, but if you come with my team, you follow my orders without question. In combat, hesitation kills people." "Understood," Jake said, though he was not sure he liked taking orders from a corporal. 2 hours later, they were back in the simulation chamber. Jake had been given standard marine equipment and positioned himself in the middle of Kane's formation. He felt confident. He was an experienced Marine with 8 years of service. How hard could it be to keep up with a team he had already watched succeed? The simulation began, and immediately Jake realized he was in trouble. Kane's team moved faster than he expected. They communicated with hand signals and short phrases that Jake did not recognize. Within the first 5 minutes, he was struggling to keep up. Kane led them through the simulated city using routes that seemed random to Jake. She would stop suddenly, signal for silence, then change direction for no apparent reason. Every time Jake started to ask why, Kane would hold up her hand for quiet. The first enemy contact came without warning. Jake saw movement in a window and started to call out, but Kane was already moving. Ben Hayes tossed something that looked like a small grenade. The window exploded in a flash of light and smoke. Zara Ka's plasma rifle fired 3 precise shots. Nick 7's fingers danced over his computer interface. Amy Clark spoke into her headset in words too fast for Jake to understand. The engagement was over in seconds. Jake had barely processed what was happening before 3 Nexari soldiers were dead and Kane's team was moving again. "How did you know they were there?" Jake asked as they advanced. Kane glanced back at him. "Nexari always put spotters in elevated positions when they set up an ambush. That window had the best view of this approach route." Jake wondered how she knew that. He had studied Nexari tactics in training, but Kane spoke like she had personal experience with their methods. The team continued through the simulation. Each enemy encounter followed the same pattern. Kane would anticipate where the Nexari would be positioned. Her team would move to counter their tactics before the enemies could react. Jake found himself struggling to contribute anything useful to the engagements. During one firefight, Jake made a serious mistake. He saw a Nexari soldier in a doorway and moved to engage without waiting for Kane's signal. The movement exposed him to crossfire from two other positions he had not seen. Training rounds slammed into Jake's armor. The pain simulators made it feel like real bullets. He fell behind a concrete barrier, his chest burning from the simulated wounds. Kane appeared beside him instantly. She grabbed his equipment harness and dragged him to better cover while Ben Hayes and Zara Ka suppressed the enemy positions. Jake was amazed at how strong Kane was. She moved him like he weighed nothing. "Stay down," Kane ordered. She peered around the barrier, studying the enemy positions. "Nix, I need a distraction in 30 seconds. Amy, call for extraction route Bravo if this goes bad. Ben, you see the support column on the left?" "Got it," Ben replied. Kane looked at Jake. "When I say move, you go straight back 20 meters to that burned-out vehicle. Do not stop. Do not look around. Just run." "I can fight," Jake protested. Kane's green eyes were hard. "Sergeant, you just walked into a kill zone because you did not wait for intel. Right now, you are a liability. Follow orders, or get more people killed." The words stung, but Jake could see she was right. His impulsive movement had put the entire team in danger. Kane's coordinated assault eliminated the Nexari positions in under a minute. Nick Seven's distraction had drawn their attention while Ben Hayes brought down the support column, crushing two enemies and blocking their escape route. Zara Ka's heavy weapons finished the survivors. After the engagement, Kane knelt beside Jake to check his simulated wounds. The pain simulators had registered multiple hits to his chest and left arm. In a real firefight, he would have been seriously injured or dead. "The wounds are not fatal," Kane said, but her expression was serious. "In real combat, you would need medical attention immediately." As she examined his armor, Jake noticed more scars on Kane's hands and wrists. Some looked like burns. Others appeared to be from bladed weapons. Up close, he could see that many of the scars were old, but some were more recent. "Kane," he said quietly, "how many times have you really fought Nexari?" She looked at him directly. "More than I want to remember, Sergeant." The simulation continued, but Jake stayed in the rear of the formation. He watched Kane coordinate her team's movements with a skill that went far beyond anything he had learned in Marine training. She seemed to know exactly how Nexari soldiers would react in every situation. During the final assault on the command building, Jake witnessed something that changed his understanding completely. Kane's team breached the building using tactics that perfectly countered every defensive measure the Nexari had prepared. But more than that, Kane called out warnings about traps and ambushes that should not have been predictable. "Pressure plate by the stairs," she warned before anyone could see it. "Sniper nest in the upper gallery," she said, while directing Zara Ka to a position that had a clear shot. "They will try to vent gas into this room," she told Nick 7, who immediately began working on the building's environmental systems. Every prediction was accurate. Every warning saved lives. Jake realized that Kane was not just good at fighting Nexari. She fought like someone who had studied their methods through painful personal experience. When the simulation ended, Jake's performance statistics were embarrassing. He had been wounded twice, endangered his team once, and contributed almost nothing to their success. Kane's team had carried him through the exercise. In the debrief room, Kane sat across from Jake. Her expression was not mocking or superior. She looked tired. "You did well for your first time against Nexari tactics," she said. "I was terrible," Jake replied. "I nearly got everyone killed." Kane nodded. "Yes, you did. But you followed orders when it mattered, and you learned from your mistakes. That is more than some soldiers manage. Jake looked at her scarred hands resting on the table. Those scars on your arms. How many of them are from fighting Nexari? Kane was quiet for a long moment. Then she rolled up her left sleeve and pointed to a particularly nasty scar that wrapped around her forearm. This one was from a Nexari energy blade during the defense of Kepler Station. We held that position for 6 days against a full assault force. She touched another scar on her upper arm. This was from a projectile weapon during the evacuation of mining colony Theta 7. Nexari do not take prisoners, so we had to fight our way out with 300 civilians. Jake stared at the scars. Those operations, they are not in any official records. No, Kane said quietly. They are not. Some missions happen in places that do not officially exist. Some battles are fought by people who are not supposed to be there. She rolled her sleeve back down. You want to know why my file is thin, Sergeant? It is because the things I have done cannot be written down. The places I have been do not appear on maps. The enemies I have fought are supposed to be classified beyond your clearance level. Jake felt like he was finally beginning to understand. How many times have you faced real Nexari? Kane looked at him with those calm green eyes. Enough times to know that the simulation we just ran was too easy. Real Nexari are much worse. That evening, Jake found Kane in the observation deck. It was a quiet area of the base with large windows that looked out into space. She was sitting alone, staring at the stars. Jake approached carefully. After the simulation, his entire attitude toward Kane had changed. He no longer saw her as an unqualified soldier with a mysterious file. He saw someone who had experienced things he could barely imagine. Mind if I sit? He asked. Kane looked up. Of course, Sergeant. Jake sat in the chair beside her. For a few minutes, they both looked out at the stars in silence. Finally, Jake spoke. I owe you an apology, he said. I made assumptions about you based on incomplete information. That was wrong. Kane nodded, but did not say anything. Jake continued. I have been thinking about what you said, about some missions not being in official records, about fighting enemies that are classified above my clearance level. He looked at her. How much of your real service history can you tell me? Kane was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. What do you know about first contact protocols, Sergeant? The question surprised Jake. Basic procedures. Diplomatic teams, careful communication, avoiding hostile actions unless attacked. That is the official version, Kane said. The one they teach in training. But first contact does not always go according to protocol. She pointed out the window, at a distant star. 3 years ago, long-range scouts detected signals from that system. The signal suggested intelligent life, possibly with advanced technology. Command decided to send a small reconnaissance team to gather information before making official contact. Jake listened carefully. The team was supposed to observe from a distance and report back. No direct contact, no interference with local populations, just intelligence gathering. Kane's expression grew dark. But when we arrived, we found something Command had not expected. We? Kane looked at him. I was part of the reconnaissance team, along with Ben Hayes, Amy Clark, and 8 other soldiers. It was supposed to be a routine observation mission. Jake felt a chill. What did you find? Nexari, Kane said simply. They had already made contact with the local species, but not peaceful contact. They were strip mining the planet and using the local population as slave labor. The pieces began falling into place in Jake's mind. That was not supposed to be possible. Nexari space is hundreds of light years from human territory. Officially, it still is, Kane replied. But the Nexari have been expanding faster than our intelligence estimates suggested. They have been making contact with species in systems we thought were empty. Kane stood up and walked to the window. Our orders were clear. Observe and report. Do not interfere. But when we saw what was happening to those people... She paused. Have you ever watched an entire species being systematically enslaved, Sergeant? Jake shook his head. The local species were not warriors. They were peaceful, intelligent. But they had no military technology. The Nexari had orbital weapons platforms and ground forces. It was not a war. It was extermination. Kane touched the glass of the window. Ben Hayes was our demolitions expert. Amy Clark handled communications. We had a full squad of experienced soldiers. We could have completed our observation mission and returned to base with a detailed report. But you did not. No, Kane said quietly. We did not. She returned to her chair. Ben said something that changed everything. He said that if we left without helping, we would spend the rest of our lives knowing we could have saved innocent people and chose not to. Jake could see where this was going. You intervened. Kane nodded. We spent 2 days observing Nexari operations and gathering intelligence. Then we developed a plan to disable their orbital weapons and give the local population a chance to fight back. 12 soldiers against an entire Nexari occupation force? 11 soldiers, Kane corrected. We lost Rodriguez on the first day, when he triggered a Nexari sensor mine. Kane rolled up her sleeve and showed Jake the long scar on her forearm. This was from the assault on their command center. Nexari use energy blades in close combat. The weapons cauterize wounds as they cut, so you do not bleed out quickly. It makes the death slower and more painful. Jake stared at the scar. Up close, he could see it was much deeper than he had first realized. We managed to take out 3 orbital weapons platforms and destroy their main ground base, Kane continued. But the cost was high. Of the 11 soldiers who participated in the assault, only 4 survived. You, Ben Hayes, and Amy Clark. Who was the 4th? Kane's expression grew sad. Danny Martinez, Colonel Martinez's son. He died 6 months later from injuries he received during the evacuation. Jake felt like he had been punched in the stomach. Colonel Martinez's son was on your team? Danny was our communications specialist before Amy took over that role. He was 22 years old and believed that protecting innocent people was more important than following orders. Kane looked out at the stars again. The Colonel has never forgiven us for letting his son die. But you saved an entire species. Kane shrugged. We gave them a chance. The local population was able to organize resistance after we eliminated the Nexari orbital weapons. Eventually, they drove the occupation force off their planet. Jake processed this information. And the official report? Reconnaissance mission completed successfully. No contact with local populations. No interference with planetary affairs. Kane looked at him. Officially, we observed from a distance and reported back. 11 good soldiers never died. An entire species was never saved. The mission never happened. That is why your service record is classified. That is one reason, Kane said. There have been other missions since then. Other times when we were sent to observe and ended up fighting. Other times when the official report did not match what really happened. Jake understood now why the alien soldiers on the base treated Kane with such respect. They had heard stories of humans who would risk everything to protect other species, even when they had no orders to do so. "How many times?" he asked. Kane considered the question. "Since that first mission? 6 major operations, dozens of smaller ones. Each time we were sent to gather intelligence or provide support. Each time we ended up fighting Nexari forces that were not supposed to be there." She rolled up both sleeves, showing Jake the full extent of her scars. "Every mark tells a story. This burn was from the rescue of the Zelani research team on Kepler-4. This puncture wound was from defending the Vortac colony on Gamma Centauri. This long cut was from the evacuation of human mining station Omega-3. Jake counted more than 30 visible scars on Kane's arms alone. Each one represented a battle, a life saved, a mission that officially never happened. "Why do you keep volunteering for these operations?" he asked. Kane looked at him with those calm green eyes. "Because someone has to, Sergeant. Because the Nexari keep expanding into systems where they should not be. Because innocent people keep dying while politicians debate policy." She stood up. "And because I have learned that sometimes the most important missions are the ones that never make it into the official reports." As Kane walked toward the exit, she paused. "Get some rest, Sergeant. Tomorrow I will show you what real Nexari tactics look like. The simulation you experienced was designed for training. What we face in the field is much worse." Jake sat alone in the observation deck, staring out at the stars and thinking about everything Kane had told him. He was beginning to understand that his evaluation of Luna 7's combat readiness was more important than he had realized. These soldiers were not just training for theoretical conflicts. They were preparing for battles that were already happening in places that did not officially exist. Jake woke up to the sound of alarms. Red lights flashed in his quarters as the base's emergency warning system activated. He checked his watch. It was 3 in the morning. He had only been asleep for 4 hours after his conversation with Kane. The intercom crackled to life. "All personnel report to battle stations immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Jake grabbed his equipment and ran toward the command center. The corridors were filled with soldiers moving quickly but calmly to their assigned positions. He noticed that none of them looked surprised by the emergency alert. In the command center, Jake found chaos. Officers were shouting orders while technicians worked frantically at their stations. Multiple screens showed sensor readings and tactical displays. Colonel Martinez stood in the center of it all, his face grim. "Sergeant Morrison," the colonel called when he saw Jake. "Get over here." Jake approached the main tactical display. What he saw made his blood run cold. The screen showed the space around Luna 7 with dozens of red dots approaching the base. "Nexari fleet," Colonel Martinez said grimly. 47 ships including 3 heavy cruisers. They dropped out of hyperspace 20 minutes ago and are moving toward our position. Jake stared at the display. How is that possible? Nexari space is hundreds of light years away. Apparently not anymore, the colonel replied. Long-range sensors show they have been building forward bases in this sector. This attack is coordinated and planned. A technician called out from his station. Sir, enemy fleet will be in weapons range in 43 minutes. Colonel Martinez turned to Jake. Where is Corporal Kane? I do not know, sir. Find her, the colonel ordered. Bring her to the command center immediately. Jake left the command center and began searching for Kane. He checked her quarters, the training areas, and the mess hall. Finally, he found her in the armory. calmly checking weapons and equipment with her team. "Kane," Jake said, slightly out of breath from running around the base. "Colonel Martinez wants you in the command center. There is a Nexari fleet approaching." Kane looked up from the rifle she was inspecting. Her expression was completely calm. "How many ships?" 47 total. 3 heavy cruisers." Kane nodded and continued checking her weapon. "Typical Nexari assault formation. They will start with orbital bombardment to soften our defenses, then deploy ground troops to finish us off." Jake was amazed by her calm reaction. "Should we not be preparing defensive positions?" "We are," Ben Hayes said, holding up a case of explosives. "Just not the kind you learned about in training." Kane finished with her rifle and stood up. "Sergeant, have you ever been in a real battle?" "Training exercises, combat simulations." "Real battle," Kane interrupted, "where people actually die." Jake shook his head. Kane looked at her team. Then, "Stay close and follow orders exactly. What we are about to face is nothing like the simulations." They walked toward the command center together. Along the way, Jake noticed that Kane's team was carrying equipment he did not recognize. Weapons that looked more advanced than standard Marine gear. Explosives that seemed different from anything he had seen before. "Where did you get this equipment?" he asked. "Some things are not in the official inventory," Amy Clark replied. In the command center, the situation had worsened. The Nexari fleet was accelerating toward Luna 7, and their intentions were clearly hostile. Colonel Martinez saw Kane and immediately approached her. "Corporal, I need your assessment of enemy capabilities and recommended defensive strategy." Kane studied the tactical display for less than 30 seconds. "Standard Nexari assault pattern. They will use the heavy cruisers to eliminate our orbital defenses while the smaller ships provide cover. Once our weapons platforms are down, they will begin bombardment of the base itself." "How long do we have?" "Orbital bombardment will begin in approximately 35 minutes, Kane said. "Ground assault will follow within 2 hours." Colonel Martinez looked around the command center. "Recommendations?" Kane pointed to different sections of the tactical display. "Evacuate sections 7 through 12. The Nexari will target our power generators and communication arrays first. Move all essential personnel to the hardened bunkers in the core sections." She turned to face the colonel directly. "Sir, you need to understand something. This is not a raid or a probe. This is a full-scale assault designed to eliminate this base completely. The Nexari do not attack positions they do not intend to destroy." Jake felt a chill at Kane's words. "How can you be so certain?" Kane looked at him. "Because I have seen this before, Sergeant. 3 times. Twice we were able to evacuate most personnel before the base was destroyed. Once we were not." The colonel made his decision quickly. "Begin evacuation procedures for non-essential sections. Move all critical operations to the bunkers. Prepare for extended siege conditions." As orders were issued and personnel began moving to defensive positions, Kane approached Jake. "Sergeant, I need you to understand something," she said quietly. "Everything you have learned about Nexari from training and simulations is based on limited information. The real Nexari are much worse than anything you have experienced." Jake watched the tactical display as the enemy fleet continued its approach. "What do you mean?" Kane pointed to the screen. "Those ships are not just carrying weapons. They carry torture devices, experimental biological weapons, and equipment designed to cause maximum suffering. Nexari do not just want to kill their enemies. They want to break them first." Ben Hayes joined the conversation. "The Nexari have a saying," he said grimly. "A quick death is a wasted death." Jake felt his stomach turn. "What are you saying?" Kane's expression was hard. "I am saying that if they capture you alive, you will spend days begging them to kill you. And they will not." The base shook suddenly as something impacted the outer hull. The lights flickered, and several displays went dark for a moment. "Probe. Weapons," Kane said calmly. "They are testing our defensive capabilities." Colonel Martinez called out, "All stations report status." Reports came in from around the base. Minor damage to external sensors. No casualties. But Jake could see in the colonel's eyes that this was just the beginning. Kane gathered her team. "Time to go to work," she said. "Where are you going?" Jake asked. Kane looked at him with those calm green eyes. "To do what we do best, Sergeant. Fight Nexari." As Kane's team left the command center, Jake realized that everything he thought he knew about warfare was about to be proven wrong. The calm, controlled environment of training exercises was nothing compared to what was coming. For the first time in his military career, Jake was about to face an enemy that wanted to do more than just defeat him. The Nexari wanted to destroy everything he had ever cared about, and they were very good at their job. The first orbital bombardment hit Luna 7 exactly when Kane had predicted. The base shuddered under the impact of energy weapons designed to punch through reinforced hull plating. Emergency lighting cast everything in red shadows as the main power. Grid struggled to compensate for damaged sections. Jake found himself assigned to Kane's defensive unit, along with a mixed group of human and alien soldiers. He had expected to be positioned in the command bunker, but Colonel Martinez had specifically ordered him to observe Kane's tactics during the battle. "You wanted to evaluate combat readiness," the colonel had said grimly. "Now you will see what real combat looks like." Kane had set up her command post in what seemed like an exposed position near the base's outer ring. Jake thought it was a mistake until he realized she had chosen the location specifically because it gave her a clear view of 3 different approach routes the Nexari ground forces would have to use. "Sergeant," Kane called out, "come here and look at this." Jake approached her position. Kane was studying a tactical display that showed the base layout and surrounding space. Red indicators marked where Nexari dropships were beginning their descent toward Luna 7. "See the pattern?" Kane asked, pointing to the display. Jake looked but could not identify what she meant. "They seem to be spreading out to attack from multiple directions." Kane shook her head. "Look at the timing. Ship Group Alpha is descending toward docking, Bay 7. Ship Group Beta is approaching Maintenance Section 4. Ship Group Gamma is targeting the communications array." She traced lines on the display. "They are not spreading out randomly. They are positioning themselves to cut off our escape routes while simultaneously destroying our ability to call for help." Jake studied the pattern more carefully. "How do you know that?" "Because it is exactly what they did at Research Station Omega 3, Kane replied. "And at Mining Colony Theta 7, and at Forward Base Kepler 4. Ben Hayes looked up from the explosives he was preparing. "Nexari tactical doctrine never changes. They use the same strategies because they work." Kane continued studying the display. "The problem with fighting Nexari is not their technology or their numbers. The problem is that they do not make mistakes. Every move is calculated. Every strategy has been tested." Another explosion shook the base. This time, the lights went out completely for several seconds before emergency power kicked in. Amy Clark reported from her communication station. "Kane, I am picking up Nexari ground forces preparing for final approach. 6 drop ships, approximately 200 troops total." Kane nodded. "Time frame?" "Touchdown in 8 minutes." Kane looked around at her defensive team. Besides Jake, there were 12 other soldiers, 6 humans, 4 Vortak warriors, and 2 Zelani specialists. All of them had the calm expressions of people who had done this before. "Listen carefully," Kane said. "Nexari ground tactics are designed to create fear and confusion. They use psychological warfare as much as physical weapons. You will see things that are meant to break your will to fight." She pointed to different positions around their defensive area. "When they breach the hull, they will send in terror troops first. These are prisoners they have modified with implants that make them feel no pain and follow orders without question. They look human, but they are not human anymore." Jake felt sick. "They use prisoners as weapons?" Zaraka rumbled something in her own language. Nick 7 translated, "She says the Nexari believe that forcing enemies to kill their own people is more effective than conventional weapons." Kane continued her briefing. "After the terror troops, they will send in standard assault forces. These soldiers are fast, well-armed, and completely ruthless. They do not take prisoners except for interrogation purposes." Ben Hayes finished with his explosives and joined the group. "The key thing to remember is that Nexari expect fear. They count on their enemies being paralyzed by horror, but fear is just another weapon, and weapons can be turned against the people who use them." Kane rolled up her sleeves, showing her scars again. "Every mark on my arms represents a lesson learned about fighting these enemies. Every wound taught me something about how they think and move." She pointed to a burn mark on her left wrist. "This scar taught me that Nexari energy weapons have a 2-second charging delay. If you move immediately when you see the weapon activate, you can avoid the shot." She touched a long cut on her forearm. "This scar taught me that Nexari blade weapons are designed to cause maximum pain with minimum damage. They want you alive and suffering. But that also means the wounds are not immediately fatal if you can control the bleeding." Jake realized what Kane was doing. She was turning her past suffering into tactical advantages. Every injury had taught her something that could be used to protect other people. The base shook again as the first Nexari dropship made contact with the hull. Kane's expression changed instantly from teacher to warrior. "Positions," she ordered. The defensive team moved to prepared locations with practiced efficiency. Jake found himself crouched behind a reinforced barrier next to Ben Hayes, who was holding a weapon Jake had never seen before. "What is that?" Jake asked. "Nexari energy rifle," Ben replied. "Taken from their soldiers during the Kepler station battle, Kane figured out how to modify them for human use." The sound of cutting torches echoed through the corridor as Nexari forces began breaching the hull. Kane held up her hand, signaling for silence. In the distance, Jake could hear footsteps and voices speaking in a harsh, alien language. Kane used hand signals to coordinate her team's positions. Jake watched as she moved each soldier to locations that would maximize their effectiveness against the approaching enemy. Every placement seemed to take advantage of some specific weakness in Nexari tactics. The first enemy soldiers appeared at the end of the corridor. Jake's breath caught when he saw them. They looked human, but their movements were wrong. They walked with mechanical precision, their eyes vacant and staring. Several had visible surgical scars where implants had been installed. Kane waited until the terror troops were halfway down the corridor before giving the signal to attack. The engagement was brutal and efficient. Ben's modified Nexari weapons cut down the first wave before they could react. Zaraka's heavy plasma rifle eliminated the survivors with devastating accuracy. But Jake could see the psychological impact the terror troops were meant to have. Even knowing they were prisoners who had been modified against their will, It was horrifying to fight enemies who looked like people he might have known. The second wave of Nexari came immediately after the first. These were real Nexari soldiers, tall and gray-skinned with black eyes that reflected no mercy. They moved with deadly precision and carried weapons that hummed with lethal energy. Kane's tactics became a masterpiece of coordination. She used every advantage the defensive position offered, while exploiting weaknesses in Nexari assault patterns that she had learned through painful experience. When the enemies tried to flank left, Nix 7 was waiting with electronic countermeasures that disabled their communications. When they attempted to break through the center, Amy Clark coordinated concentrated fire that eliminated them before they could establish a foothold. During the fiercest part of the battle, Jake saw Kane take a hit from a Nexari energy weapon. The shot burned through her armor and left a smoking hole in her left shoulder, but instead of falling back, Kane used the wound to her advantage. "Now I know the range and power setting of their weapons," she called out to her team. "They are using standard assault configurations. Take cover behind the reinforced barriers and return fire in 3-second intervals." Jake watched in amazement as Kane turned even her own injury into tactical information that helped protect her soldiers. Every scar on her body represented not just survival, but knowledge that could save lives. The battle continued for 2 hours, wave after wave of Nexari. Forces tried to break through Kane's defensive position, but her team held firm. By the time the last enemy soldier was eliminated, Jake understood something that changed his entire perspective on warfare. Kane's scars were not just evidence of past battles. They were weapons. Each wound had taught her something that made her more effective at protecting other people. Every injury had been transformed into knowledge that could prevent others from suffering the same fate. As the base's emergency systems reported that the Nexari assault had been repelled, Jake looked at Kane with new respect. Her shoulder was still bleeding from the fresh wound, but she was already coordinating with other defensive teams to ensure the base was secure. Jake realized that true warriors were not people who avoided getting hurt. True warriors were people who learned from their pain and used that knowledge to protect others. The medical bay was filled with wounded soldiers from the battle. Jake sat on an examination table while a medic treated a minor cut on his arm. The injury was nothing compared to what others had suffered, but it was his first real combat wound. Across the room, Kane was receiving treatment for the energy weapon burn on her shoulder. The medic had removed her damaged armor and was cleaning the wound. Jake could see the full extent of the scars covering her arms and back. There were dozens of them, each one a story of survival and sacrifice. "How many times have you been wounded?" "In combat?" the medic asked Kane as he worked. Kane considered the question. "I stopped counting after the 20th. "And you keep volunteering for these missions?" Kane looked at the medic directly. "Someone has to." Colonel Martinez entered the medical bay and approached Kane's examination table. His expression was serious, but not unfriendly. "Corporal Kane," he said formally, "I have received reports from all defensive positions. Your section repelled 7 separate assault waves with 0 casualties and minimal wounded. Outstanding work." Kane nodded. "Thank you, sir. My team performed exceptionally." The colonel looked around the medical bay at the other wounded soldiers. "Final casualty count for the entire base is 12 wounded, 2 serious, no deaths. Against a Nexari assault force of that size, those numbers are nothing short of miraculous." Jake understood what the colonel was not saying. Kane's tactical knowledge and experience had saved lives throughout the base. Her understanding of Nexari methods had allowed the defenders to prepare effectively for attacks that should have been devastating. Colonel Martinez turned to Jake. "Sergeant Morrison, I believe you came here to evaluate our combat readiness." Jake stood up carefully, favoring his injured arm. "Yes, sir." "And what is your assessment?" Jake looked at Kane, who was allowing the medic to bandage her shoulder. He thought about everything he had witnessed over the past week. The simulation exercises that Kane's team had dominated. The real battle where her experience had proven invaluable. The scars that told stories of battles fought in places that did not officially exist. "Sir," Jake said slowly, "I came here thinking that combat readiness could be measured by training scores and service records. I was wrong." He gestured toward Kane. "Corporal Kane and her team have combat experience that cannot be quantified in official reports. They have faced enemies and situations that most soldiers never encounter. Their readiness level is far beyond anything I expected to find." Colonel Martinez nodded. "And your recommendation?" Jake took a deep breath. "My recommendation is that other bases should send personnel here to learn from Corporal Kane's experience. Her tactical knowledge could save countless lives if it were shared more widely." Kane looked up from her bandaged shoulder. "Sergeant, there is something you need to understand. The knowledge I have gained comes with a price. Every scar represents not just a lesson learned, but pain endured. No one should have to learn these things the way I did." Jake approached her examination table. "But if others can learn from your experience, they might not have to pay the same price." Kane was quiet for a moment. Then she rolled up her right sleeve and showed Jake a small scar on her palm. Unlike the other marks, this one was neat and precise. "This was my first combat wound," she said quietly. "I got it during my second week of active duty 7 years ago. A piece of shrapnel from an explosion during a training exercise that went wrong." She traced the small mark with her finger. "I was young and inexperienced. I made a mistake that could have gotten people killed. This scar reminded me every day that in combat, small errors have big consequences." Kane looked at Jake directly. "But you know what I learned from that wound? I learned that scars fade, but the lessons they teach can last forever. If my pain can prevent others from making the same mistakes, then maybe it was worth something." "Ben." Hayes approached from across the medical bay, his left arm in a sling. "Lisa, you saved a lot of lives today. Not just here on Luna 7, but everywhere else too." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. Amy Clark joined the conversation, a bandage covering a cut on her forehead. "The Nexari attack on this base was a probe. They were testing our defenses to see how effectively humans and aliens can work together. If they had succeeded here, they would have launched similar attacks on other joint bases throughout this sector." Kane nodded. "By stopping them here, we have bought time for other bases to improve their defenses. The tactical information we gathered during this battle will help prepare for future attacks." Jake realized the full scope of what had happened. The battle for Luna 7 was not just about defending one base. It was about proving that mixed-species forces could stand against the Nexari threat. Colonel Martinez spoke again. "Corporal Kane, I have been authorized to offer you a promotion to sergeant and a transfer to command staff. Your experience would be valuable in training other units." Kane considered the offer. "Sir, I appreciate the recognition, but my place is with field units. The next time soldiers face Nexari forces, I want to be there to help them survive." The colonel nodded, though Jake could see disappointment in his expression. "Very well, but I want you to work with Sergeant Morrison to develop training programs based on your experience. Other soldiers need to learn what you know." Jake felt honored by the assignment. I would be grateful for the opportunity to learn from Corporal Kane. Kane looked at him with those calm green eyes. Are you sure, Sergeant? Learning what I know means understanding things that are not in any manual. It means accepting that sometimes the most important battles are fought by people who are not supposed to be there. Jake thought about everything he had witnessed. The scars that told stories of sacrifice. The team that worked together with the coordination of people who had saved each other's lives repeatedly. The tactical knowledge gained through pain and loss. I am sure, he said. Kane smiled for the first time since Jake had met her. It was not the cold smile of a warrior preparing for battle. It was the warm smile of someone who had found a way to turn suffering into something meaningful. Then we start tomorrow, she said. But first, let me show you something. Kane walked to the medical bay window that looked out into space. The Nexari fleet was gone, retreating to wherever they had come from. But Jake could see other ships. Approaching Luna 7, human vessels and alien ships flying together in formation. Reinforcements, Kane explained. Other joint bases are sending support in case the Nexari return. Jake watched the approaching fleet. Ships from different species flying together, working toward a common goal of protecting innocent lives from an enemy that showed no mercy. You know what the most important thing I have learned is? Kane asked. Jake waited for her answer. Kane touched the small scar on her palm. I learned that the worst wounds are the ones that teach you nothing. But if you can learn from your pain, if you can use your scars to protect others, then even the worst experiences can become something valuable. She looked at Jake directly. That is what real combat readiness means, Sergeant. Not just the ability to fight, but the wisdom to know what is worth fighting for. As Jake watched the reinforcement fleet dock with Luna 7, he understood that his evaluation of the base's combat readiness had become something much more important. He had learned that true warriors were not measured by their lack of scars, but by their ability to turn those scars into weapons that protected others. Kane's service record might be classified beyond his clearance level, but her true qualifications were written in flesh and proven in blood. She had earned the respect of every soldier on Luna 7, not through paperwork or promotions, but through sacrifice and commitment to protecting innocent lives. Jake realized that he had come to Luna 7 to evaluate combat readiness, but instead he had learned what it really meant to be a soldier. Sometimes the most important records were not kept in files. Sometimes the most valuable qualifications could not be written down in official reports. Sometimes the best proof of a warrior's worth was simply letting the scars speak for themselves.